And we will come to that in the next paragraph. After he passed away, I started the fortnightly magazine Back to Godhead sometime in 1944 and tried to spread the cult of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu through this magazine. After I took sannyas, a well-wishing friend suggested that I write books instead of magazines. Magazines, he said, might be thrown away, but books remain perpetually. Then I attempted to write Srimad Bhagavatam. Before that, when I was a householder, I had written on Srimad Bhagavad Gita and had completed about 1,100 pages. But somehow or other, the manuscript was stolen. In any case, when I had published Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto in 3 volumes in India, I thought of going to the USA. By the mercy of His divine grace, I was able to come to New York on September 17th, 1965. Since then, I've translated many books, including Srimad Bhagavatam, the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Teachings of Lord Chaitanya, a summary, and many others. So Srila Prabhupada took the advice of his well-wishing friend to write books. Prabhupada had another well-wishing friend in Bombay, Mr. Brij Ratan Mota. And Mr. Mota suggested to Srila Prabhupada that he include a section of the Bhagavad Gita in each issue of Back to Godhead magazine. And Srila Prabhupada took it as a good instruction. Although he modified it, and instead of serializing the Bhagavad Gita, he decided to serialize Srimad Bhagavatam. But that came from Mr. Mota. Mr. Mota. In the meantime, I was induced to translate Sri Chaitanya Caritamrita and publish it in an elaborate version. In his leisure time in later life, His Divine Grace Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur would simply read Sri Chaitanya Caritamrita. It was his favorite book. He used to say that there would be a time when foreigners would learn the Bengali language to read the Chaitanya Caritamrita. The work on this translation began about 18 months ago. Now, by the grace of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and His Divine Grace Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, it is finished. In this connection, I have to thank my American disciples, especially Shriman Pradumya Das Adhikari, Shriman Nitai Das Adhikari, Shriman Jaya Dwaita Das Brahmachari, and many other boys and girls who are sincerely helping me in writing, editing, and publishing all these literatures. Srila Prabhupada would take rest, generally, he would take rest about 10 o'clock and get up at about midnight and translate. While we young boys and girls were fast asleep, and practically the whole world was asleep, he would be translating. And he would continue to translate until his morning walk, pretty much. And if possible, he would translate again later in the day. And he did it for us. He did it for us. And therefore, to reciprocate his effort for us, his compassion for us, his love for us, we should read his books. He made the superhuman effort to translate the books for us. And therefore, it's our duty to read them. Now we come to a very crucial paragraph, which will require some discussion. I think that His Divine Grace, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, is always seeing my activities and guiding me within my heart by His words. As it is said in Srimad Bhagavatam, Tene Brahma Hridaya Adikavaye. Spiritual inspiration comes from within the heart, wherein the Supreme Personality of Godhead, in His Paramatma feature, is always sitting with all His devotees and associates. Now, we often hear that Krishna is in the heart. Sarvasya chaham hridhi sannivisto. But this is a very, confidential explanation of what it means that Krishna is in the heart. Krishna is in the heart, but He is not alone. He is sitting in the heart along with His confidential devotees and associates. So here, Srila Prabhupada is saying that his Guru Maharaj is always seeing his activities and guiding him by his words within his heart. Now, we've discussed that Srila Prabhupada kept the orders of his spiritual master in his heart. And therefore, one could say he's being guided by his spiritual master words within his heart, means by the instructions that he received from his spiritual master during his master's manifest presence. But here he's giving a hint that his spiritual master is also present in the heart along with Krishna. And he can also speak from within the heart. And that is the fact. That is the fact. But how to hear the spiritual master within the heart is not so easy. In the 4th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, there is a story about a king who went in the forest with his wife as a vanaprastha, and eventually the king left his body, and his wife became a widow, and she was ready to enter into the funeral pyre, to give up her body in the funeral pyre. Srila Prabhupada explains that figuratively the king is the spiritual master, and figuratively the wife is the disciple. And that just as the wife was ready to give up her life in the absence of her husband, the disciple should be prepared to lay down his life for the mission of the spiritual master. Or in other words, one should rather die, one should prefer to die than to fail to execute the order or the mission of the spiritual master. When the queen was ready to give up her life, to enter the funeral pyre, a Brahmin appeared and said that I am your old friend, and the Brahmin gave her some instructions. And again, Srila Prabhupada explains that the Brahmin appeared in the absence of the king, in the absence of the spiritual master, to give instructions to the disciple. The Brahmin is actually a, you could say, representative of the super soul. The representative of the super soul. And Srila Prabhupada raises the question, quoting Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary, that why didn't Krishna appear directly in his original form? Why did he appear as the Brahman? And Srila Prabhupada explains that unless one is very advanced in love for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one cannot see the Supreme Personality of Godhead in his original form. But the Paramatma, and again, as we're understanding, the Paramatma includes his associates. The Paramatma can manifest himself in the form of a Brahman or a Shiksha Guru. Anyway, we are fortunate to have many, to have our spiritual master's instructions and to have our spiritual master's personal presence. But it is an issue because we don't always have that physical presence of the spiritual master. But we want to feel his presence. We want to be connected with him. And we're connected with him by following his instructions. But sometimes we don't know exactly how to follow his instructions. It becomes a puzzle. How to follow his instructions, how to apply his instructions. But if we are in that mood of just being ready to die, of preferring to die than not to execute the order of the spiritual master, not to prosecute the mission of the spiritual master, the spiritual master will make sure that we get the information we need, the guidance we need to serve him. If that is our only desire and we don't have any ulterior motives, he will do that for us. Krishna will do that for us. It is to be admitted that whatever translation work I have done is through the inspiration of my spiritual master, because personally I am most insignificant and incompetent to do this materially impossible work. I do not think myself a very learned scholar, but I have full faith in the service of my spiritual master, His Divine Grace, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So, just imagine, he translated 17 volumes in 18 months. That means like one a month, almost one a month. From the material point of view, it's impossible. It's impossible. But he did it having full faith in the orders of his spiritual master. And Srila Prabhupada instructed us in the same spirit, in parampara. Because Prabhupada was writing the books, but the disciples were lagging behind in the publication. And so he confronted his leaders in Los Angeles at the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust that I want the remaining volumes. I think maybe 2 volumes had been printed, maybe 3. So he wanted the remaining 14 volumes to be published within 4 months. A humanly impossible task. And when Srila Prabhupada said that, Rameshwar Prabhu, who was the head of the BBT, said that it was impossible. And Srila Prabhupada replied, impossible is a word in a fool's dictionary. But Rameshwar Prabhu was not convinced that it was possible, because actually it was humanly impossible. So he asked Srila Prabhupada, Well, what if we're not able to do it? And Srila Prabhupada replied, disqualified. In other words, if you don't do it, you're disqualified from your service. We'll look for someone else. So, by Srila Prabhupada's mercy and potency, the devotees accepted the instruction, took the instruction to heart, and they did what was materially impossible. They practically stopped eating and sleeping. They'd sleep maybe 2 hours a night, which was like what Prabhupada did. And the artists, for example, the artists, they made like an assembly line. In other words, not that you have to do it like that, but they gave up their false egos. They gave up their false egos for the sake of serving Srila Prabhupada. So often an artist will have some, may have some false ego. This is my work of art. But they realized that the fastest way to bring out the paintings was if the one who was expert in, say, conceptualizing it, he would or she would do the conception. And the one who was expert in drawing people would draw the forms of the people. And the ones who were expert in the backgrounds and in trees and rivers and flowers, they would do the backgrounds. And like that, they just, because each volume had to have so many paintings. So every department, the Sanskrit department, the editorial department, the typing department, they were working in a very cooperative mood, without false ego, and hardly eating or sleeping, and they did it. They did it. And in that process, they became so attached to each other, with Prabhupada in the center, or Caitanya Mahaprabhu in the center, Krishna in the center. They just gave up everything, all thoughts of personal comfort and self-interest, and they just served for the pleasure of Srila Prabhupada, and they did what was materially impossible. I was party to something similar, not on the same level, definitely not on the same level, but something similar. Srila Prabhupada wanted the Juhu temple to be built in 6 months. Now that is materially impossible. So anyway, it's like he just would not tolerate any delay or slowness. He just would not tolerate it. And I was trying to bring contractors, builders, somehow trying to get some help to do the job. And so I brought a very big builder, G.L. Raheja. And Prabhupada said, can this be, he showed him the drawings, said, can this be built in 6 months? And Mr. Raheja said, yes. Well, anyway, it's a long story, which is not so relevant. ultimately, it took about 2 years and 8 months. And when people look at that complex, even I, like, to do such a huge complex with very special architecture. I mean, the auditorium was like state-of-the-art, designed by one Parsi man who was like the leader in the field, and then the domes, all the carved marble, the kalashes. I mean, it was just like, that was really fast. But when we were going through it, it was as if we were like hardly inching our way along, and Prabhupada was just not in the mood to tolerate any excuses or delays. But we accepted it. You know, we tried to follow his order, and well, we didn't make the deadline, but we did it somehow or other. And that can happen. That can happen. When you take the order of the spiritual master as your life and soul, or give your heart and soul to serving the order of the spiritual master, wonderful things can happen. If there is any credit to my activities of translating, it is all due to His divine grace. Now, this is another point. Actually, His Holiness Radhanath Swami sort of made the point that it's not exactly that Prabhupada wrote the books, but it's like Krishna, and as we're reading, Krishna and his associates, including the spiritual master, and in a way the whole parampara. Once Srila Prabhupada was speaking to some newspaper reporter, magazine reporter, about his books. And he mentioned that actually his books were written by Krishna. This was, I believe, in New York. It was in America. And Rameshwar Prabhu is a very intelligent person, very intelligent person. He could see that that reporter was having difficulty understanding what that meant, that Krishna wrote the books. So he tried to make it easier for the reporter to comprehend, and he said, well, what Prabhupada meant was that Krishna gives him the intelligence to write the books. And Prabhupada said, no. Krishna writes them directly. So we are definitely getting Krishna and the entire parampara through the books. And Srila Prabhupada would himself read his books. That itself is proof that the books are transcendental, or in a way that Prabhupada himself did not write the books. Because what author, what mundane author reads his own books? They'll write it, finish it, and then begin the next one. But Srila Prabhupada would read his own books. And he would relish them because they were transcendental. Prabhupada's servant, Shrutakirti Prabhu, says that on a number of occasions he would walk into Srila Prabhupada's room and Prabhupada would be reading one of his books, the Bhagavad Gita as it is, or the Krishna book. And Prabhupada looked up at him and told him, he said similar things about both books, but we'll say the Krishna book. He said that this literature is so wonderful that if you just read this one book, Krishna, you can become completely Krishna conscious. And then he said, you don't even have to read the whole book. If you just read one chapter, you can be completely Krishna conscious. Then he said, you don't even have to read a whole chapter. If you just read one page, you can become completely Krishna conscious. And then he said, you don't even have to read one page. If you just read one line, you can become completely Krishna conscious. And then he said, you don't even have to read one line. If you just read one word, you can become completely Krishna conscious. Because these books are Krishna. In these books you get Krishna, you get Caitanya Mahaprabhu, you get the whole parampara. And I mean, the same could be said of Prabhupada's spoken words. There was one time in Amritsar, this was a very special day, just to give you a sense of how enthusiastic Srila Prabhupada was to preach. So we had been invited by a friend named Hari Krishna Das Agarwal. You can imagine I was completely new in India. I thought, what a name, what a place, India. So anyway, he arranged for Prabhupada and the devotees to go to the Vedant Sammelan in Amritsar. And there was like a morning program and an evening program. But Prabhupada was receiving a lot of invitations to go to temples, to go to homes, to go to societies. And he just was accepting every invitation. And the devotees couldn't keep up with him. So Guru Das Prabhu approached Srila Prabhupada and said, Srila Prabhupada, we can't keep up this pace. I mean, I'm sorry, but the devotees are getting sick, they're getting dysentery, they're exhausted. So Prabhupada said, okay, I'll only accept 2 programs a day. So it was going all right for a while, but the invitations were accumulating and time was running out. So one day, Srila Prabhupada accepted 7 invitations. And Srila Prabhupada would go by car. You know, usually the host would arrange for a car. And we would go by rickshaw. And it was very hard to keep up. I remember once he did a program at the Durgama temple, I think. Anyway, it's like he'd probably already been there for a half hour, and we got there just as he was leaving. And then he got in his car, he sped off to the next program. We had to get in our rickshaws and try to catch up with him. But the very last program, I think they were devotees. They were definitely devotees. Prabhupada spoke in Hindi, and I didn't know much Hindi, but somehow, by his mercy, I could understand what he was saying. Of course, he was quoting verses that I knew, but it was just some mystery. So I understood a fair amount, and you could see he was relishing the association of those devotees, and he was relishing Krishna. He was relishing the association of Krishna. So at the end of the program, he came back to the camp, and he was in his room. You know, we got back later, but I saw the light on in his room. And I was just so curious. I thought, boy, Prabhupada's still awake, it's so late. And he did so many programs. So I sort of crawled up to the window and peeked through the window, and there was Srila Prabhupada sitting behind his low table on his asana, listening to the recording of the talk he had just given. And then I thought, okay, like, that wasn't Prabhupada, that was Krishna. I mean, of course, Prabhupada's included, but that was Krishna. And Prabhupada is relishing Krishna. He's relishing associating with Krishna through the words that Krishna inspired him to speak to those devotees. So these books are not ordinary. They're Krishna. They're Krishna and the whole parampara. And they have great potency. There was a devotee who had a son who was very pious, very pure-hearted, very special boy. And that boy was very devoted to his guru. He wasn't initiated by him, but he was very devoted to his guru. And he was very absorbed in thoughts of his guru. But his father, somehow his father felt that his son should have like more of a relationship with Srila Prabhupada as well. I mean, not to minimize the value of the personal spiritual master at all, but he just felt that his son should have more of a relationship with Srila Prabhupada also. And so he convinced his son to start reading Prabhupada's books and listening to Prabhupada's tapes. And the son did it. And he began to feel his relationship with Srila Prabhupada develop or awaken. And he's a very pious boy, I mean, very pure-hearted boy. And he started to have dreams about Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada would come to him and give him instructions. And anyway, it's just one example. Of course, no one can replace one's personal spiritual master. That's not possible. That's very much part of our system, parampara. But it's just on the idea that by Vani, by how substantial Vani is and how real the relationship based on Vani can be. Of course, there's a difference because means why the personal presence is so important, because otherwise you could think, well, why do we even need a spiritual master? We can just read Srila Prabhupada's books. But there's a reason, which I can summarize in a very short statement that Srila Prabhupada made. As you know, there's a verse in the second chapter of the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, Nasta prayeshu abhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya, that by serving the book Bhagavat or the person Bhagavat, one gets the same result. So once a disciple asked Srila Prabhupada that, yes, one gets the same result, but still, is there some difference? I mean, is one better than the other? And Srila Prabhupada replied, the person Bhagavat is better because he can catch you by the ear. So we need that. We need that personal guidance. Otherwise, we can read the books and have an imaginary idea. I mean, of course, if we're sincere and we're in the proper mood, that won't happen. But because we are conditioned souls and we are prone to make mistakes, we can have an artificial idea of what the books mean or what it means to follow the books. So we need that. We need someone to catch us by the ear and set us right. If there is any credit to my activities of translating, it is all due to His divine grace. Certainly, if His divine grace were physically present at this time, it would have been a great occasion for jubilation. But even though He is not physically present, I am confident that He is very much pleased by this work of translation. He was very fond of seeing many books published to spread the Krishna consciousness movement. Therefore, our society, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, has been formed to execute the order of Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu and His Divine Grace, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So again, Prabhupada comes back to the order of the spiritual master and how Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur wanted many books on Krishna consciousness to be published and distributed. And Srila Prabhupada says that ISKCON, yes, his own service of writing and publishing books was in pursuance of his Guru Maharaj's order. But the whole International Society for Krishna Consciousness is meant to fulfill the order of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And in particular here, Srila Prabhupada is emphasizing the writing and publishing and distributing of transcendental literature. It is my wish that devotees of Lord Chaitanya all over the world enjoy this translation. Well, how will we enjoy this translation? By reading it. If we don't read it, we won't relish it. So, yeah, Srila Prabhupada said, not that you're guilty of this, certainly not, but Srila Prabhupada said it's not enough to distribute my books, you should also read them. And he said that, yes, referring to the devotees, Sankirtan will make them, Sankirtan will keep them happy, and reading my books will keep them. It is my wish that devotees of Lord Chaitanya all over the world enjoy this translation. And I am glad to express my gratitude to the learned men in the Western countries who are so pleased with my work that they are ordering in advance all my books that will be published in the future. On this occasion, therefore, I request my disciples who are determined to help me in this work to continue their cooperation fully, so that philosophers, scholars, religionists, and people in general all over the world will benefit by reading our transcendental literatures such as Srimad Bhagavatam and Sri Caitanya Caritamrita. The same order passed on to us through parampara. Srila Prabhupada gave the example of a choo-choo train that, that his Guru Maharaj was pushing him. Like that's how a train is. So his Guru Maharaj was pushing him, and similarly now he's pushing us, and in the future we will push our followers. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports to Sri Caitanya Caritamrita, dated November 10th, 1974, at the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, Hare Krishna Land, Juhu, Bombay. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.